Welcome to the Build Wealth Canada podcast, where it's all about becoming debt-free, accelerating your wealth, and taking control of your money. Now, here's your host, Cornell Schreiber.
Hey, it's Cornell, and welcome to the Build Wealth Canada podcast. One of my favorite types of interviews is when I get to interview someone who has hit their financial independence or retirement number early, and then picking their brain on how they got there. What worked well for them, what didn't, what mistakes they could have avoided, and learning what makes them feel happy and fulfilled both before and after hitting that financial independence number. Well, this time I got to do this with one of the most famous personal finance experts in Canada, David Shilton, who, as you may know, was also one of the dragons on Dragon's Den. Dave's best-selling book, The Wealthy Barber, was actually the first personal finance book that I ever read. I read it in high school, and in a way, it actually started me down this path of early financial independence. Dave has recently released a massive update to the book. It's also available in audiobook format, which is great. And you can check it out over at thewealthybarber.com, where he also posts some incredibly valuable and free financial education for us Canadians. I'm incredibly grateful that Dave has chosen to spend so much of his free time educating Canadians and trying to improve financial literacy here in Canada. You can definitely tell that he's not doing it for some massive financial gain. He's genuinely trying to help, and I'm happy to support him in any way that I can. His educational content is incredible. Definitely check it out, and it was an absolute honor to interview him. Now, let's get to the interview with Dave Shilton. All right, Dave, welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be here. I really appreciate you having me on.
Dave, the original Wealthy Barber sold over 2 million copies. It's a Canadian classic. You've also achieved massive success with the Looney Spoons books. After becoming financially independent, you could be doing anything, yet you spent 16 months doing a complete rewrite of the original Wealthy Barber book. What was the driving force or the frustration that made you feel you had to do this now?
No, it's as simple as I thought I could really help. I look back at that formula of using the story, taking the intimidation out, wrapping in the humor, et cetera, having the characters very much represent the viewpoints, the fears that the average reader does. And I thought this is the right time to put it back out. That being said, had I known how difficult it was going to be, I thought it would take 4 to 6 months, not 16. Mm-hmm. I might have been a little bit more concerned because it's a lot. I mean, writing is very challenging. The way I do it is unusual, where I test as I write with the target demographic, garner their feedback, incorporate it into the manuscript, et cetera. It's a lot. And, there's a lot to put in a book like this now. In the old days, there was just RSPs, for example. Now we've got TFSAs, FHSAs, more psychology, more about the challenges of saving when you've got this very difficult environment of high costs, et cetera. So it was a lot, but I'm really glad it turned out the way it did. And the feedback it's creating has been excellent so far.
That's great. Yeah, some of these tools didn't exist when you first wrote the book, right? It was so much about mutual funds back then, right? And
that's
now
right.
With ETFs and then even social media, right? It wasn't around back then.
Not at all.
And now it is. So now we're bombarded with even more of these, meme stocks and these get rich quick things. It's a lot more common now, I think, as well, especially if, for the younger generation. It can be easier to make a mistake, I think, when you see all these different influencers sometimes say different things to try to get you to, buy their course or follow them.
It's nonstop. I mean, it really is. Yeah. And some are very good, by the way. If you look at some of the online educators, they are top drawer. But the average person has trouble figuring out who are the good ones and who are the not so good ones, who's got a vested interest, who's trying to sell. Putting that together for, again, a layman viewer is very difficult. So I don't want to slam all of them because some of the influencers, some of the educators online, I would say are top drawer. I mean, in fact, in Canada, some of the ones that have risen to prominence with retirement planning, we have a number who are outstanding in real estate. There are some very, very good ones. And of course, on the investment front, we have both Ben Felix and the Plain Bagel. I would say they're better than any of the US counterparts. So there's lots of outstanding materials online, but it's also overwhelming. There's so much of it out there that the average person just trying to get by and figure out the 4 or 5 things they should be trying to do is overwhelmed. And often that results in almost a paralysis. They don't move forward with anything because they can't figure out which path makes the most sense.
For sure. Yeah. I've had Ben on the show before, and he's wonderful. But yeah, I know what you
Ben
mean.
He's like, let's be honest, he's a brilliant guy.
Yeah.
And he's a nerdy guy. He's a detailed guy, incredibly well researched at all times. In fact, I would say in my career, I've probably enjoyed his material more than anybody's I've followed. And that's a lot of people when you go back and think about all the books being read, et cetera. So no, he's top drawer.
For sure. Yeah, it's been quite the shift, right? Because it used to be that there wasn't as much information out there. And so it was all about finding the information, it seems, maybe when you first wrote the book. But now it's like there's an abundance of information and you have to learn how to sort through what is the sort of get rich quick, someone's just trying to sell you something versus the actual true, time-tested, research-backed, that kind of a thing. So it's a very different skill set.
Hey, when I wrote The Wealthy Barber and it came out in January of 89, there were 2 other Canadian personal finance books on the bookshelves. That's it. And as you point out, no internet, no TV shows related to personal finance at all. Completely different era. No wonder The Wealthy Barber did well. It was the only game in town, for heaven's sakes. Like, if there was not a lot of places to turn. But you know what? Strangely, all of this information overload we're seeing is actually helping the current update of the book, because people are saying, okay, there's too much. There's a trusted source. There's somebody who's been out there a long time. They're not trying to sell me a product at all. And they're going to look at all these different things from different perspectives. And I think that overloading of information is probably serving the updated version quite well.
For sure. Yeah, especially now, like with AI and content being auto-generated in a sense as well. I mean, it's
getting worse.
It's how do you cut through the noise, right?
Exactly.
And like you said, it's more about the quality than the quantity. The quantity is definitely there.
It is.
So now it's a question of quality and how do you find it, for sure. Now, in addition to the book, you also have a podcast, you have a YouTube channel. And I recall you mentioning that you're also, this is what I was really interested in. You mentioned you were working at one point on an AI tool that takes your past lessons and research and lets Canadians ask questions based on your teachings. So I thought that was fascinating and such a good idea. Now, with so much good content out there already, like you've already said, what motivates you to keep working on these projects and adding to the content instead of just fully retiring? It doesn't seem like more wealth generation is your primary motivator with these projects.
No, in fact, we don't even monetize most of them. The podcast, for example, we don't take advertising. We're not doing lead gen, et cetera. Different answers for different products. The podcast is really a passion project. We knew there wasn't a Canadian podcast out there that had really reached out to the masses with all the top experts and thought that maybe the brand power could help to draw the eyeballs. That being said, we did not foresee it doing as well as it's done. Without any marketing, it's picked up a lot of momentum in that first year. So that's gone well. And then I put out the snippets on the different social media platforms. Kind of fun putting those together. And they're all over the map. There's no rhyme or reason to them. They don't relate to each other. And they're very short. And I think they've captured a lot of people's attention. The thing that we're most proud of on that front is the number of people who have said, hey, it's got me thinking about personal finance. It's brought it front of mind. They see we were putting them out almost daily for a while. Now we're down to a couple times a week. So different motivations for different things. It's fun. I'm never going to retire. I'm just not the type. If you saw my golf game, you would quickly understand why I'm not going to retire. And so I'm just not that type. Like, I'll probably keep working for many, many years, not necessarily always doing this type of thing, but I'll always keep working. And it seemed like the time was right. And even when I'm asked about why now for rewriting the book, the primary reason is I felt that it could help people and there were challenging situations out there. But another reason is I'm old. Like, if I didn't write it now and sit down for that kind of 16 months and that kind of hard work, I may not be able to do it in 3, 5, 7, 10 years realistically. So from both those perspectives, it made sense to go now.
Do you ever feel like when you're making this content, do you ever think to yourself, oh, this has already been said so many times. What's the point of me just saying it in my own words? Or do you approach it from a different lens?
No, it's a legit question for sure. I mean, a lot of this is out there. And also sometimes it can sound trite because you're basing it, down to the basics. You're trying to narrow it down. So I'm very, very much aware of that. And so how do you present it in a way it's more likely to stick, more likely to resonate? Because in many instances, to your point, I'm not saying anything very different from what's been said by a lot of the other people out there. So how are you going to say it where it changes people's behavior? It makes them think differently. Well, I try to wrap it in stories. I try to wrap it in humor. The fact that I've been around so long can draw from a lot of experiences and present those examples. You're trying to combine all of those things and communicate it just that little bit differently so it resonates more strongly with people. That's the effort. Does it always work? Probably not. I'm sure some people watch some of the videos and go, yeah, I already knew that and blah, blah, blah. But it works enough that you hope that cumulatively you're making a positive difference.
Interesting. So if I understand you correctly, is it more so about how can I communicate this so that people actually take action on it, as opposed to like, oh, I'm going to talk about our ESPs now. And then even though that's already been talked about and there's already some good resources on that, you're approaching it from a different angle of, okay, yes, I'm still going to give you the information, but I also want this to actually change your life, or you're actually acting on this. Did I understand that correctly?
Absolutely. And so even when you're putting those together in your head, you're writing them, you're formatting them, you're putting the flow together, you're thinking, what is the listener hearing here? What is going to make that person likely to move forward, to see things differently, to at least think this through? Sometimes the humor is a big part of it because it keeps them watching. Sometimes just the right example woven in at the right time is how you do it. And so interestingly, it often takes longer time-wise to write the 3-minute snippet than it does to write something that's 15 and 20 minutes, because you're trying to achieve a lot and you don't have much time. So what do I highlight? What's the order here? What humor do I use? Can I hit them pretty hard? Like, so for example, when I put out things on the importance of taking advantage of your employer match, I'm pretty in your face there. Like, you followed me for years. I'm a pretty low key guy. I try to be positive and polite, but with those ones, I'll say, like, don't be an idiot. Like, if somebody's going to give you a dollar for dollar match on your group RSP, you have to do it. And again, I think coming from someone who's old and that's been around so long, having them be that direct in that particular case, that might be the right approach. In other videos, you may take a different communication style. So more of the thought ahead of time is going into how it's going to be presented than necessarily even what's going to be said. Because, again, a lot of people you write are familiar with some of these subjects. How do we change behavior? How do we nudge them forward? How do we stay somewhat positive? Because all of this can be intimidating, overwhelming even. All of these are the measures you're trying to take. With the book, it's a little bit different, because with the book, I'm really focused on the whys behind the whats. So yes, you need to save 10 to 15% of your net income, but why do you need to do it? And if you do it properly, what are the potential rewards down the road? What can go wrong? Why does pay yourself first work? When doesn't it work? All of these types of nuances and subtleties are covered. So the book ended up being quite comprehensive, like it's 250 pages. And some people might say, well, you could boil the major lessons down to 10 pages. That's not unfair, but it wouldn't work. You could do it, but it wouldn't impact people. It's because they get it in that form where there's conversation, there's dialogue, there's the what about this, or I always thought that, or why that won't work for me. Those are the things the characters are saying, and then other characters, including Roy the wealthy barber, able to say, well, what about this? Try it this way. Here's why you're doing that. I think learning all the whys, realizing this stuff is not as complicated as sometimes the industry makes it seems, that's the magic of the Wealthy Barber format. And again, I'm the first to admit I kind of lucked into that format. I actually started writing another book called The Ultimate Guide to Losing Money all those years ago. That was kind of a short form look at the mistakes we make, a more traditional approach, a little bit different because it was, again, short hitters. And I got the idea watching Cheers to use a fictional approach. In fact, it was initially called The Wealthy Bartender, and then moved it over to the barbershop. But it seems, again, like that conversational approach, emphasizing the whys behind the whats. It's what's made it such a difference maker.
That's very interesting. Yeah, it seems like especially this day and age, it's so easy to get the facts, right? Like, oh, what is the max TFSA contribution? Yes. What's the, all these very specific things, like do what the one-line answers. But the harder thing is like what you're talking about, more behavioral,
Absolutely.
More people actually absorbing it, taking action on it. Yeah, I could see there being a lot of value in that. Because knowing is one thing, doing, as we both know,
even when you're talking about, let's say, using index fund ETFs, it's so important to prepare them for the tough times that are going to come. Inevitably, the markets are going to have downturns, severe downturns, prolonged downturns. Okay, that's fine. That's all part of this. Here's why you have to focus long-term. Here's the history of markets. Here's the slight advantage dollar cost averaging can give you mathematically, et cetera. Here's the kind of time frame needed. All of those things are important. Well, if you can bring that all across, but again, using conversation, using some humor, using characters that people have bought into, it sounds like a funny way to wrap it up, but it's all that old expression, a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. To a large extent, that's what the Wealthy Barber harnessed was, let's make this more fun. Let's make it more inviting. I think, funnily enough, though, everybody has looked at the book and said, well, it's because you used conversation. That's why it pulled people in. I think a bigger issue was that the people reading it identified with the narrator and one or two of the other characters and thought, the narrator's already admitted he's no good at math. He hates personal finances. He hates investing. That's me. And now I can learn along with him, learn along with his sister, learn along with his wife, et cetera. And I think that kind of invited people in and took the intimidation out right away. And in the updated version that you've seen, the first time they go visit the barber, he only had one message to them, and that's, you can do this. And he walks them through for a page or two about why he believes that, what people have achieved in the past, how it's not that tricky. There's only the 4, 5, 6 things you need to understand. They're all kind of interesting. And in fact, he often promises them, if you open your minds to this, you'll find it interesting. And the characters end up doing that and finding it very interesting. So I think that's kind of why the whole thing works.
That makes sense. And then, Dave, at this stage of your life and after all your financial success and being on Dragon's Den, I mean, you must have an abundance of choices when it comes to how you spend your time. How do you decide what projects are worth it? And how do you filter what you say yes to, both personally, but especially professionally as well?
Well, personally, it's pretty easy. I'm one of the most low-key people that way you'll ever meet. I love people and I'm very outgoing when I'm in the public, but I am a huge loner, like huge. I spend 95% of my time alone. And I love reading. I love doing things on my own. And I've always been that way. I do a lot of thinking. I'll do it in the car when I'm driving, etc. So it's fairly easy. I've learned over the years how to say no. In fact, my friends expect me to say no. I also go to a lot of things for very brief periods of time. So I'll go to a wedding, but I'll only go for 2.5 hours. Like I've always been a little weird that way, to be honest. Professionally, it's tough, figuring out ahead of time what to say yes to, what to say no to. There's different opportunities that come. As you get older, I'm less inclined to take on the opportunities that involve a lot of travel. I just am tired of going to the airports all the time. So I try to stay closer to home as I do things. But I stick to personal finance. I come and go a little bit because that's my passion. And you want to make a big difference. And where else can you go where hopefully you can affect millions of people? That's what a great situation. I mean, I love that aspect of it. You can write a book and instead of just having a conversation over a table with 2 people, all of a sudden you're having it with millions of people potentially. And that's the part that really excites me and draws me in. Plus, finally, I'm not that talented. There's only a few things that I've proven to be okay at. I stink at most things. If you saw me dance, fix things, sing, I can go on and on and on about the things I can't do. Golf, I mean, really. But for some reason, I'm passionate and really enjoy communicating on personal finance. And then on the other front, I love doing due diligence or used to love doing due diligence on deals. I'm less excited with that now. And another reason why I've gone more back to personal finance.
Do you have any certain specific decision criteria that you, like, let's say someone approaches you and they want you to take on project X, whatever that may be. And yeah, there's some maybe monetary potential, but I mean, I assume that's not really...
No, the money part's not high.
Nowhere near the top of your list. Yeah.
Most of what I do, though, I kind of come up with on my own. I don't partner a tremendous amount. I'm very controlling. I'd be the first to admit that, to the point of that being a weakness. I don't delegate particularly well. I like doing things kind of on my own and controlling my own fate, controlling my own destiny. So most of what I take on is something I'm doing with either on my own or with my team. And I've got a team here I love. Like, we're not just good at working together, but I mean, I truly love them. They're family to me. And so I don't want to get a lot bigger than that. And so one of the criteria would be, hey, would you try this out? No, because we'd have to have 10, 15, 25 employees, 35 employees. And I'm at a stage in life I really don't want to take that on. So that certainly is one. But a lot of times it's, are we going to help enough people? So if you're going to throw yourself into it, is it going to be a true difference maker across the board? I think that's one of the things I've liked about the podcast, is that a lot of people get back to us and say, hey, I listen every week and it's made a big difference in how I handle my monies and the decisions I'm making. You really want to hear that. That's exciting.
Well, one thing that I've heard you mention several times is that people email you all the time, wanting your input on certain things. How do you balance that one-on-one help, which I can see being very fulfilling because you're actually impacting a person individually, versus you wanting to impact as many people as possible? Because it's like one is scalable, the other one's not, but one's more personal, I would say, right? Because you're actually connecting with that person and you can probably give them better advice because you know their situation a bit more. The other one, less so. How do you
That's a great question. I would say in general, I've balanced it poorly. And it's because we've taken on, I think, 95% of the callers over the years. I really do try to get back to everybody. And I don't give them a lot of advice. Like, in a lot of ways, I'm acting as a bit of a sounding board. They may send me their spending summary, for example. I won't give them any specific investment advice unless they're a really close friend and you're sitting down. And even then, I don't go toward the investment. I go toward the overall financial planning. But people are often sharing their plans, sharing their triumphs, their tribulations, asking me, general questions, et cetera. And what it really helps me to understand is where they're going wrong, what they don't understand en masse, et cetera. So a lot of the reasons I think I've been able to communicate effectively on stage and on page is because these people have reached out and you've learned from all these one-on-one conversations where people are going wrong. In fact, it's interesting, even 3-4 years ago, this is relatively recently, a couple of the financial experts were talking about how everybody knows what an ETF is now. Everybody. And I'm like, are you kidding me? The vast majority of people don't know what ETF stands for, don't know how ETFs work. And so again, the industry often has this assumption of a certain level of knowledge that for most people is just not there. Well, how do I know that? Not because I'm sharp, not because I've got great instincts, but because I'm talking to people all the time. And there's certain parts like overall plans and spending summaries where I think I've probably seen more than anybody ever because people have been sending them to me for decades. And I love going through them. I love looking at spending summaries. I think I have some sort of mental problem because I really do. Like we had a rush of them when we first started putting out the videos, and I love looking at, I'm like a voyeur. And I love looking at what people, how they're spending their money, what excites them, where they're making mistakes, what they're doing well, where they cut back in one area to allow bigger spending. I find all of that quite fascinating, actually.
How do you prioritize your time? Because I could see you getting too much into the one-on-one or too much on the scalable things, but now you're not as connected to the actual audience. How do you choose? Do you have, in terms of time management, things of that nature?
Oh, I'm horrible. And my assistant, Mo, who's been with me for 35 years, is worse than I am. Like, she's the worst gatekeeper in the history of the world. Basically, anybody can call. She'll go, yeah, no, Dave will talk. I'll say to you, Mo, I can't see with anybody. Charles Manson could call, and she'd put him through. Like, she is absolutely the worst gatekeeper. So between her horrible gatekeeping and the fact that I really do learn a lot from this and I get tempted by it, in general, we're not so good at that. And there have been times it's become a little overwhelming. So probably the best example was during the years on Dragon's Den, we were doing our own due diligence. And so running the businesses, still being involved in Financial Awareness Corp, my own company, then doing due diligence, then getting all the calls. It was overwhelming. And I finally got a letter from my daughter. She was in her early 20s at the time. Said, Dad, you've always been a great father. You're not right now. And something like that really jumps out at you and go, okay, she's right. I've lost the balance somehow. And I've got to make some other changes. Normally, I got away with all of that because I don't socialize much. And that extra time helped me to do all these things. But in that case, I'd gone too far. And it's the primary reason I left Dragon's Den was I couldn't keep up. And I went back to kind of managing the others. But in general, doing a very scientific, well thought through to time management has not been a strength of mine. It really hasn't been. Now, I stay up very late. I get up quite early. And so having those extra hours tends to help too.
And now a quick message from one of our sponsors.
It's the small things that make us Canadian. At BMO ETFs, all of our tickers start with Z. That's right, Z, not Z. From ZSP to ZEB, we know how to build solutions for the Canadian investor. So the next time you invest in ETFs, consider a Z instead. Visit BMOETFs.com for more.
Now, when you get overloaded, is there something that you do now, having gone through that before, that you can rely on to get past it?
I usually eat 2 to 3 butter tarts, and I just find the sugar. I got that from my father, and that'll really rev me up and get going. No, I mean, again, I'm not really strong at this, so the listeners should be a little cautious about taking advice from me. I have definitely allowed myself to get too busy and a little overwhelmed on more than one occasion in my career, and it's a problem. And then, of course, something suffers. There's no doubt about that. It can't be naive. If you're too busy in one area, then maybe something in your personal life takes a back seat, which is a little bit unfair. I'm getting better as I get older, but I would still say overall, it's a weakness of mine. But when people are calling you and they're saying, this is what I'm doing, and they're heading down the wrong path, or they're getting very bad counsel, it's hard not to say, hey, have you thought about this? And again, I don't tend to give specific advice. I often will say, have you thought this through? Or have you read this? Or you should look into this. That type of thing to help them along the way. But those calls that you think are going to take 5 minutes end up taking 25. And so if you field a number of them in a day, it really adds up. And in the days that I was doing a lot of the publishing business too, we literally got overwhelmed. I know I've used the word overwhelmed too many times, but we really did at our business from requests for help from authors. And that's the one area we had to step away from. So I still help friends, but the authors I didn't know, we had to step away. One year, I know this is going to sound crazy, but we got, I think, 1,800 requests for book help. And when you start dividing by 365, you're going, well, you're getting 4, 5, 6 a day. Absolutely. We had days we got 10 to 20. And I remember at one point, Mo said to me, it was a Wednesday one week, and she said, you've had 53 requests for lunch already this week. And so that obviously gets very tough to strike all the balances. But as I sound like I'm complaining, remember, I have benefited dramatically from this. There's no way you could have written that update to The Wealthy Barber without having had all these conversations with people in their 20s and 30s. Having my kids talk to me about their finances, their friends, my friends' kids, et cetera. All of those conversations played a huge role in the flow the book got and what it chose to cover, et cetera, et cetera. So there's good and bad to all of these things, like everything in life, I suppose.
Now, for so many of us, our identity is tied to our career and the goal of getting there financially. But when we get there, you're financially free. There can be that void. You've basically won the game. You've reached the top of the mountain, and then you find yourself asking, "Okay, well, now what?" Have you ever experienced this, especially becoming successful so early? Like I believe you were in your 20s, right, when the book was published. Have you ever experienced this yourself, where you hit that sort of top of the mountain, and now you're asking yourself, "Now what?" And then, if so, how did you navigate it?
A little bit, I wouldn't say top of the mountain, but I did a little bit of that when I left Dragon's Den. I went from being so busy to cutting back almost too much. I stopped private company investing for a couple of years. I wasn't writing a follow-up to the book, and I stepped back and thought, boy, I'll really enjoy this break. I'll play more golf. I'll do more socializing. And I realized within 12 to 18 months, I'm not wired that way. That, yeah, I can play a little more golf and get a little bit more, but in general, I thrive and I'm happier when I'm working on something. But then you've got to find, okay, what's next? What projects do I want to tackle? How do I want to get involved? I got back to doing some private company investing, et cetera. So I wouldn't say I had the void as in I don't know what to do and I don't know how to define myself. It was more what project is coming along next. And even now I'm always thinking that. So when we're done with, all the financial education or we're doing less of it, what else are you going to add to the mix? I'd like to write a play. For whatever reason, I've always wanted to write a play. I've read so many books on playwriting. I've come up with a lot of ideas, but I've never taken that 12 months and set it aside to do that. And so that's something I think I want to do relatively soon because, again, I'm old. And if I wait too much longer, maybe I won't have the capability or the health to do that.
So what have you found to really be the key to your feelings of happiness, fulfillment? Again, you have so many options at this point, so many requests for your time. You mentioned you're getting older as well. Everyone's got to find out of time, but but so I mean, what have you found to be sort of the key things that you've learned to help you make these decisions?
I think I'm really quite adept at knowing myself. And I know that, for example, I like living alone and that's who I am. And so I know that about myself and I don't kind of get off that. I spend a lot of time alone, as I mentioned, but I've got a lot of hobbies. And I think hobbies are such an important part of life. You get so much joy from trying to improve in certain areas or trying to learn a lot about different subjects. And so as an adult, I've tried to pick up Spanish when I used to go to Costa Rica a lot. A couple of years ago, I started French, although I had to put that in the back burner because of writing the book. But I love doing all of that type of thing. And so I'm always pushing myself in those areas. I'm lucky to have fantastic friends. I have friends in KW. I have friends in Sarnia, Toronto group, because of course in finance, spend a lot of time there. I try to stay connected to that group. I follow sports very closely. But most importantly was luck. I was just born with a quite positive disposition. My whole family has been. And so, that has been a huge break. In fact, you don't realize until you get older, that's not always the case and that you lucked into that. I've lucked into so much. I had the greatest parents ever. And so, you don't choose your parents. And so I lucked into these two parents who were wonderfully wise and helpful and loving and knew exactly when to support and when not to support. What a great head start in life. And then everybody in my family, for the most part, has been quite healthy. So again, I've had a lot of things fall my way, even the wealthy barber. Like, think how much luck went into that. You're sitting there watching Cheers one night. If you don't happen to think, hey, there's an opportunity, then it would have been an entirely different book that had come out. I'd like to think it would have done well, but it certainly wouldn't have come to these levels. And so I've had a lot of things fall my way in life. There's no doubt about that. And, I've said on stage many times, we talk about male privilege, white privilege, Canadian privilege even, being born in such a wonderful country. But the ultimate privilege in life is good parent privilege. You fall into good parents. That sets you on such a strong path. So the breaks have really come my way. I'm the first to admit that.
Do you ever deliberate about, okay, how much should you focus on helping the most amount of people, like you mentioned, like with your podcast, with your YouTube videos, with your book, where it's not a financially driven thing, it's more, altruistic in a sense, versus, okay, I've only got this many more years on the earth, roughly. I should do some things for myself as well. How do you balance those two? Have you figured out a good way to look at it so that you can kind of still enjoy life guilt-free, but at the same time, clearly you've got this altruistic component as well. How do you manage that?
I'm lucky because I enjoy the former more. I do get the joy. It's not a sacrifice at all. Like, I like doing the financial education and getting involved in a lot of charity events. Like, to me, in fact, I look at the charity event involvement over the years. A lot of my best friendships have come from getting tied into those charity communities. So I think those getting involved in charities, but also getting involved in helping people professionally has led to a lot of joy personally too. Like I like all of that, but your point is a good one because I think going forward, I can see the balance changing a bit. So for example, I can see doing some travel. And this summer I took a vacation for a week where I didn't work at all, even though the book wasn't quite done. And I knew I had to come back to busy times. I need to do more of that. And I think I will do more of that going forward. But again, I don't tend to think about all this as much as most people. Like people think, what's your 5-year plan? What do you think you're going to be doing? I don't tend to think that way. I've kind of attacked the moment or maybe 12 months out, but I don't tend to be thinking again way down the road. Who knows? And again, a lot of it will be health dependent too.
Now, switching gears a little bit, one of the big changes from the initial release of your book to present day is how much easier it has become to be a DIY, low-cost passive index investor through the use of ETFs. What are your thoughts about using asset allocation ETFs, also known as all-in-one ETFs, versus buying the individual underlying ETFs and putting them in the most tax-efficient accounts, to save a bit on fees and gain some extra tax savings as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of putting them in those tax-efficient accounts, you can do the same things there, whether it's the all-encompassing all-in-one ETF or whether it's the individual. But if you're willing to put the work in and do some research, putting together your own portfolio of ETFs is probably a more prudent move because you can get the fees down anywhere from 15 to 20 to 25 basis points. That's not insignificant. And I would argue this is not a tremendous amount of work. You don't have to adjust all the time. You do have to do the rebalancing on your own. But again, that's not an unbelievable amount of work. That all being said, most people aren't going to do it. And precisely because of that, I do think there's a big place for the all-in-one asset allocation ETF. I think they can be very, very helpful. And I think that product is going to continue to become more and more prominent in people's lives.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was really curious your take on it because I struggle with that quite a bit. I get a lot of questions from the audience about it. And, I like to do the underlying ones a lot.
Sure. Well, you and I are, because we're kind of geeky, nerdy guys.
Yeah.
Right. And we read,
exactly.
It's true, though. We read everything. Like, I know you're that way. And so we read everything and Millionaire Teacher and, the Couch Potato blog, all those things that came out. We follow all of those initially, and now we read all of the things online. But the vast majority of people aren't going to do that. So two elementary school teachers married to each other, not going home at night to do the examination of this, even periodically too often. And so if they can get a product that has a quite low fee base, a little higher than what you and I would create on our own, but still very, very low, not the 2% that we've dealt with so much in Canada, et cetera, but 27 basis points, whatever. I'm making up the number. I think that trade-off is a good one for those people who aren't as geeky and nerdy and passionate about this as you and I are.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because I've helped individuals talking one-on-one, like my parents, for example, and some others. And then, you just, after speaking for a while, you're like, they're never going to rebalance this. You just get the...
But that is actually, like, we're laughing now, but that particular point we probably should repeat. A lot of people, you can kind of push them and you can convince them to do the work you initially talked about. Let's not go the all-in-one. Let's build our own portfolio. But I wonder sometimes if we're doing them a disservice because we do save them a little bit on the expense ratio, but they don't do the rebalancing.
Yes.
And so unless you do both steps, then I don't think we've helped them. I think we might have hurt them a little bit. And my experience, much like yours and your parents, most people aren't going to do that. And therefore, it may make sense again to emphasize the all-in-one asset allocation funds.
Yeah. And I worry too, like if I told them buy the underlying, there's also almost like an incentive gets created for them to speculate a little bit, right?
Sure.
Like, oh, well, US is overvalued now, or is it because of AI? And then then they start kind of getting in their heads. And now you're kind of opening up the floodgates, so to speak, whether it's AI now or the pot stocks back in the day, that kind of thing. So yeah, like you said, you're trying to help them, but you also don't want to, get them shot in the foot by accident as well.
Hey, can we talk about the pot stocks so I can brag?
Sure.
So I was following all that with, tremendous interest because it was so wacky. And one day, my son, who loves the investment arena, I walked him through why the pot stocks collectively, not talking about each individual one, but collectively had to fall almost 80 to 90%. They had to, because you could do the basic math on the most revenue the industry could generate, take a very, very generous bottom line margin, let's say 15% to throw a figure out there, and you still couldn't make the math come close to the valuations the marketplace was giving. So calling it perfectly on the timing front, very difficult. Calling each individual one, very difficult. But you knew that within a year, 2, 3 at the most, the pot stocks were going to run into incredible difficulties. And the only way they wouldn't is if all of a sudden we all started smoking joints pretty much all day, every day. That's about the only way that math could have worked. I mean, that truly got to the point of silliness.
Yeah,
it really
and not just all of us smoking it in Canada, but people around the world also partaking. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, we all seen a lot of bubbles. Like, I'm old, and of course you see it quite frequently. But I would say that one was maybe the most obvious ever from a basic math perspective. And usually when you have a bubble, the reason you have it is you can spin a very compelling narrative. So when you go back to 2000 and the tech stocks, it was easy to spin a great narrative. So AI right now, AI may become the most important thing in our lives. You can easily create a narrative to somewhat justify the high valuations and all the money that's going into the stocks. You couldn't do that with the pot. That was what was different about it. When you looked at the underlying math there, no narrative could get you to where the pot stocks collectively traded. So to me, that was not only a bubble, but it was absurd. And so I remember walking Scott all the way through it and saying, this is going to end badly and probably quite quickly. And sure enough, it did. And I mean, it's amazing, by the way, how many people I knew who had a crazy percentage of their money tied up in those. Now, they would argue it's not as bad as it seems because they didn't put that big a percentage in to start. Some of them got in relatively early and then it went up. But what a lesson a lot of them learned about when you're playing speculative stocks and you end up getting a 5, a 7, an 8 bagger, take some money off the table. You don't have to take it all off, although that might have been prudent in that case, but you got to take some off. These were speculative stocks that were way running ahead of their fundamentals. I really enjoyed following all that, by the way. I remember every day I'd be reading the National Post, I'd be reading the Globe about all of it, and it was fascinating stuff to me.
Now, a lot has been written on safe withdrawal rates over the years, with much of the research being done in the US using US data. For us Canadians, what are your thoughts about how much we can sustainably withdraw from our portfolio annually in retirement to not run out?
First I want to start with when that, first came out, the paper on the 4% withdrawal rate, et cetera. I remember it was a fellow from, I think, California who had written it. And Smart Money, the magazine, now gone, covered it, and everybody covered it. I ended up reaching out to him and just calling him, got his number somehow, and he answered his phone. He was incredibly polite. I know Ben has had him on the podcast, a very sharp guy, but again, he just answered his phone and answered questions. I want to make a couple points about the withdrawal rate. One of the things that has always surprised me is, do you know that when they talk about the 4% withdrawal rate, there's no fee assumed there?
Right.
That has always been stunning to me, that hasn't been communicated better to the people listening to it. So if you're looking at products that are 100 basis points, 1% fee, then you have to factor that into your general thinking. Because markets have been quite robust for a long time now, we've had pullbacks, but in general, for many decades now, markets have been strong. You could have gone with a much higher withdrawal rate, but of course, that doesn't guarantee you can in the future. I think the withdrawal rate argument in general is a dangerous one. When you sit down with a very competent retirement income planner, somebody who's helping you to figure out the most tax efficient ways to get at your monies, to get to the needed income, to make sure that longevity doesn't jump up and bite you, they don't tend to think that way. They don't tend to think about one all-encompassing withdrawal rate. They tend to think about what's the most tax efficient way to get at all of this. All of that being said, I still think the 4%-ish figure makes sense. I think that it's in the general ballpark. It's not a bad rule of thumb for people. However, it's only a starting point. To me, people still have to get to a competent advisor. I've talked a lot in interviews the last few years and even on our videos about how there seems to be a break in the industry. Some advisors are phenomenal at helping their clients do income retirement planning, where they're making sure they're doing it the optimal way from a tax efficiency. Like, they are so good. They're using advanced software. They're excellent communicators. They are really on top of it. And many others aren't doing it at all. I don't see many people do it badly. It seems to be it's either well done or not at all. And that not at all is not healthy, because the monies that can be saved through proper planning on this front, significant. So anybody out there who is heading towards retirement, make sure you're getting very good advice on how best to tap into all of these different funds you have. Think about all the different income sources you have in retirement. Normally when we're working, we have our work income. Maybe somebody has some rental income too, but most of us just have our rental income, our work income. Now all of a sudden you're in retirement. You've got potentially a work pension. You've got CPP. You've got OAS. You've got drawdowns from your TFSA, your RSP, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How do you, again, mesh all this together in the optimal way? You need help, and you need software help usually. Even the competent people can't do it. I was saying on one podcast I did that I've only done it once thoroughly in my life, did it for a friend, and I had Bristol board out, and it was like 24 hours, 36 hours of working through all these scenarios and using proper assumptions, you really have to be quite competent. So get good advice is my advice.
Mm-hmm. Is there a particular years until retirement number or age that you'd recommend someone really says, okay, let's actually sit down with a qualified financial planner, model all this out, run the different scenarios? Do you have any advice in that regard? For someone right at university versus 10 years away from retirement.
Yeah, I'm pretty aggressive on that front. I mean, I'm going to use an age, even though I think you're better to go your route, which is kind of years from retirement. But I think by the age of 50, people probably should have sat down with somebody and started thinking all of this through and making sure they're planning it out properly, and which accounts do you optimize or put most contributions in going forward in the next few years to set yourself up to optimize the tax withdrawals, et cetera, later. So I think relatively early, we're seeing some fee-only financial planners now focus in this area. So this is where they are specializing. And, the ones I've come across, and certainly I haven't seen work from all of them, it's been pretty impressive, to be perfectly honest. Like, it's been very well done. So there are competent people out there, no doubt.
For sure. Yeah, we have good Canadian-specific software as well. That does this, which is wonderful. So yeah, I was thinking that's such a good piece of advice, because I find what stresses me out sometimes is Canadians listening to some US specific content and just automatically assuming that it applies to us. And when it doesn't necessarily do that, right? And so this is where I think it comes in your advice about getting an actual financial planner to look at this, use the Canadian software, use their Canadian knowledge to actually give the right advice.
I would say not important, imperative. Absolutely imperative, yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, Dave. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Where can we read or listen to your new book, as well as your podcast and the educational videos that you make?
The podcast is available everywhere podcasts are available. And then we're at Wealthy Barber for the social media stuff. And then the book is available at Indigo and finer bookstores across the country. The audiobook, which seems to be going over wonderfully well, is available at thewealthybarber.com. And the audiobook, it seems to be drawing strong praise. And so it's good. I mean, I'm thrilled that the book is going over this well. It's funny, even when you're old, you hate criticism. You don't get as thick skin as you get old as you would think. And so putting it out there, you're going to take some hits. And so I'm really happy that everybody seems to be enjoying it so far. It's been a good start.
That's wonderful. Well, thanks for releasing it. I appreciate your service to the Canadian financial community, helping educate us Canadians. I mean, it's really, really appreciated. I was telling you before we went online that yours was the first personal finance book I ever read in high school. So I appreciate you updating it, since there's so many new things that have happened since then. You mentioned FHSA, TFSA, ETFs, all of that. I mean, it's such a good thing. I'm going to, hopefully I don't have to force my kids too hard to read it. I'm definitely going to.
How old are your kids?
So 7 and 11.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, they'll probably be able to read up to chapter 4. And then the rest of it will be beyond them. But a few years from now, obviously, they'll come back to, although with you as their father, they're probably already on top of all of this. They've got their spreadsheets all over their bedroom walls, et cetera, et cetera. You were laughing when you read it. I really do have to chuckle. I cannot believe how many people have said to me in the last week or two since we announced the book was on shelves, like, you might be dead by now. Because they read it like 35 years ago. And of course, they assumed that the author was 35, 40, 45, not what I was. And so they're like, wow, I'm kind of surprised you're still around. But I won't be around for the next update in 36 years. That I can assure you. If I am, don't read it.
They start asking you for health advice, longevity advice.
How are you doing this? And I say, well, a lot of black nibs. That's how I'm doing it. So anyway, thanks so much for having me on. It's nice to do an interview with a fellow in Kitchener. So that's cool.
That's right. That's cool. Right. It's great. All right. That's wonderful, Dave. Thanks so much for coming on.
Pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye. And now a quick message from one of our sponsors. There are so many opinions on how to invest your money today, but it can be hard to find credible voices to rely on in the world of finance and investing. One resource I turn to every week is the ETF Market Insights YouTube channel, led by today's episode sponsor, BMO ETFs. Market Insights brings in industry experts, and their weekly episodes cover the hottest themes like inflation, infrastructure, healthcare, and more. Tuning in helps me stay up to date on what's happening so I can be a smarter investor. And you can also submit your own ETF questions to be answered on the show. So do yourself a favor and subscribe on YouTube to ETF Market Insights, or visit etfmarketinsights.com so you can be notified when future episodes go live.
Thanks for listening to the Build Wealth Canada podcast at www.buildwealthcanada.ca.